Hey everyone, cybersecurity is a really difficult industry to get into, right? I mean, IT in general is difficult to get into, let alone cybersecurity. Now, what's strange is that according to the US Department of Labor, there's a alleged shortage of cybersecurity professionals of 500,000, but a lot of people struggle to get into those positions. So with that in mind, I've got Grant Collins on the show today, and we're going to talk about getting into the cybersecurity space. Now, whether you're a beginner, brand new to IT, never done tech work before, or if you are in some other sector of IT looking to pivot into security, this is the episode for you. So that and lots more on today's episode of the Security Swarm Podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back for another episode of the Security Swarm Podcast, the podcast that brings you the knowledge and insight straight from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. As always, I'm your host, Andy Syrewicze, and I've got Grant Collins with me today. How's it going, Grant?
Hey, how you doing, Andy?
Doing good, doing good. I know this is your first time on the show. Really appreciate you taking the time to come and share your insights with us. But before we get started, can you give us a little bit of an introduction of yourself? That way our listeners know a little bit more about you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Grant Collins. As Andy has said, I am a security engineer, and I primarily focus in several different domains, security and analytics, vulnerability management, and a little bit of network security. So I've been kind of doing a lot of everything for the last couple years. And yeah, so I recently, well, not recently, but I came into the cybersecurity industry through a college degree program, and yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Very cool, very cool. And I think you've got a YouTube channel as well, don't you?
That's correct. So I also teach on post YouTube videos, and I teach just how to get into cybersecurity and my experiences getting into this industry as an entry-level professional. There can be challenges that you have to navigate through, and so I kind of just try to share that stuff.
For sure. There are some very unique challenges getting into the space, and we're going to be talking about some of those as we step through the episode today. But if you're cool with it, Grant, I'll put the link to your YouTube channel in the show notes. That way people can check it out if they're interested.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Andy. I'm not huge on self-plugging, but I appreciate it.
Well, hey, I'm a huge believer in giving back to the community, and I think it's great that you're doing that. So credit where credit is due, right?
Well, that's fair.
Sounds good. Well, we've got some interesting stuff to talk about today, and really what we're talking about here is it kind of plays into what you just mentioned, right? And that is getting into cybersecurity. If I'm either brand new to IT, don't know anything about it, how do I get into cybersecurity? Or the other very common thing that I'm seeing a lot these days, and this applied to me several years ago, was, okay, I've been in IT doing other stuff like infrastructure maybe, or help desk support or whatever. I want to make a change and pivot into cybersecurity, right? And how do I do that? And that's really what we're talking about today. And I think that lines up pretty well with a lot of the stuff that you cover on your channel, right, Grant? So I think it's great that you're the perfect guy to talk to about this, I think. So looking forward to your insights.
Yeah, I think it's the cybersecurity industry is, what I've learned is that it's vast and there is no right one path. When you think about becoming a nurse, it's like you go to college, to nursing school, but cybersecurity and IT in general, as you probably know, Andy, it's expansive, and there's the paths that you get into. So yeah, it's exciting.
It's funny. You mentioned the different paths thing. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people who are not in the industry and you work on computers for a living, right? But yeah, I mean, sure, we can say that, but it's a little more. There's a little more to it than that, right? So yeah, it's definitely expansive and does create some challenges for folks when they. I guess it's one of those situations where there's almost too many choices sometimes, right? And so people have a hard time deciding, one, to get into IT, and then two, what do they do once they're here, right?
Right, so, what to focus on, and yeah, that's very true.
Definitely. Well, I think the first area we should kind of dive into as part of this conversation, Grant, is kind of answering that question, right? Or at least providing some insight on like why get into cybersecurity. And I think the first point that really stands out to me here is that I've heard this metric thrown around quite a bit over the last several months, right? As of the time of this recording, March 2024. But in my notes, I put the word alleged, and I'll explain that a little bit later. But we have an alleged shortage of 500,000 cybersecurity professionals, right? And I say alleged because currently out in the market, I just see post after post after post of like, hey, trying to apply for cybersecurity jobs, not getting hired, right? So it's weird. I see it where like, hey, there's a job shortage, allegedly, but people are unable to get into the space, right? So it's really strange. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Grant?
It's a total catch-22. I have realized as an individual who took a traditional path of you graduate high school, go to college, get your degree, and boom, there's going to be multiple six-figure opportunities, given to you with starting dates or whatever it is. And you graduate university and you realize you're in a pool of thousands of candidates, it seems, and there are lots of requirements that you'll never meet at an entry-level perspective, specifically experience. Right. And so I have found that it is interesting because there are marketing metrics about millions of cybersecurity jobs globally available right now, but there are people who are trying to get into these jobs and they can't seem to land an opportunity. They're applying to hundreds of jobs online and they don't even hear back. And so it's part of the reason why I kind of started my YouTube channel and something that I've continued to talk about as I've grown into my career is that it is hard, and your feelings of difficulty or you're just perplexed maybe by why it's so hard are valid. And it's okay to have those feelings because across the board, I think entry-level candidates end up feeling that. And it's kind of discouraging after a while. I think that entry-level cybersecurity, it does exist, but it's small, in my opinion. There's only a small amount of opportunities out there because most companies are looking for individuals who bring experience, maybe with a specific skill set or tools, and there aren't a lot of programs or opportunities for direct mentorship. So, yeah, what are your thoughts, Andy? I mean, what have you encountered with individuals?
Yeah, I think that's very much the same thing. I'm in agreement with you in that I think the spots for entry level it's a very small amount, right? And I think the other part of it is, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit later in the episode, is that I think a lot of the job application game, not only in this industry, but other industries as well, has become how can I get my resume, my LinkedIn profile to get past the digital sorting mechanism, right? Like we all know that employers are either employing some sort of, recruiting firm, or they're using some, big recruiting platform that digitally screens every application, right? And so it's almost comical at times. I don't remember what the protocol was, but I remember one of the IT subreddits I'm part of, somebody had applied for a job that required this newish experience with this newish protocol. And they were like, we need somebody that has 8 years experience in this thing. And the guy that was applying for it, he's like, that's funny because that protocol has only been out for 5 years. I know that because I was on the team that developed that protocol. So like it's almost laughable. Yeah. That's an extreme situation, but I hear about those types of things quite frequently, right? Where these organizations are wanting like, all this experience that you'd have a hard time finding that in a single individual. So I think that's part of the problem as well, in my opinion.
There's a disparity, in my opinion, between HR and marketing and managers. And I think a lot of the boilerplate, you require 5 years or 10 years experience, and you have these degrees and certifications. And I think that there is a disparity. And,
Right.
From my perspective, I had a former manager who ended up, he has 20 years experience, and he ended up applying for a different job, and it was at one of the major airlines. And they wanted him, but HR basically said, no, we can't hire you because you don't have a degree in IT, anything IT. And so it's like, you look at something like that and you think, wow, you're missing an opportunity for such a great candidate who brings 20 years experience. And I think that it's not even just on an entry-level perspective, but also there's just a disparity in general with the expectations for cybersecurity recruitment compared to what's actually going on underneath.
For sure. And I think that's a great segue into the next section of today's conversation, and that is those educational pathways, those resources to start getting into the space, right? Because, cybersecurity is very much a knowledge-focused field. I mean, there's a lot more to it than just having the knowledge. You have to be able to apply it. You have to be able to recognize, attack chains and patterns, and it's a vast field as well, too, because I mean, what I'm thinking of off the top of my head is social engineering. Social engineering is not a cybersecurity specific thing. That's more of like a psychology background, right? So I mean, that's where it gets interesting. And we kind of talked to the vastness of the space a little bit earlier. But when we look at the different pathways, and I know you'll expand on this a little bit, really it comes down to, I see it come down to two different methods for getting into the space in most conversations, right? Like the pathway that you went through, the more university-based routes, go through an official degree program. And I have to imagine you probably tack some certifications on top of that as well. And then there's more of like the hands-on guy in the trenches, work his way up the corporate ladder type of thing. And it's interesting because you've got the university side of it covered. I went the other route. I straight out of high school, I did some college, and I don't know, I just was not wired for university. Like, I've always been a very hands-on learner. Like, I wanted to get out there and start doing stuff. And so I ended up, thankfully, to my good luck, I had the opportunity to go work and do IT for a Fortune 50 manufacturing company, and I learned a ton. But it worked out for me. It doesn't work that way for everyone. So I realize I'm very fortunate that it worked out for me that way. And but yeah, those are traditionally the two methods, right? And either way that you go, I think with this field specifically, is regardless of the way you go, you have to be driven to learn. Because as we know with our field, it changes almost daily in some cases, right? And I feel like that cadence of change has increased over the years, right? And I've probably said this quote on the show before, and listeners of the show will probably agree with me. But one of the guys I look up to in our industry is Jeffrey Snover. I don't know if you're familiar with Jeffrey Snover, Grant, but he is largely considered as the creator of PowerShell, and also was one of the chief architects of Windows Server way back when. Great guy, funny guy. But one of the things that he says in one of his talks that I've listened to over the years was like, if you don't like change, you should probably go be a lumberjack, because that industry is by and large the same as it was 80 years ago, right? So, but he has a point, and I'm sure that's probably, I would imagine you probably share that opinion, I'm guessing, right, Grant?
Absolutely. I realized it's another kind of catch-22 for me personally, is that I love learning. And so this is a great industry to be in because it's new every day if you choose to make it new. And in addition, it's fun to have hands-on practical knowledge of all different things. Like one week you could be diving into, I don't know, like you could be doing some sort of scripting or automation, and then the next week you're working with integrating a tool on your infrastructure. And I'm being very broad, but yeah, I think that it's awesome that you get to learn different skill sets. But at the same time, it can lead to burnout, because it's like you're constantly having to try to play a game of catch up to some extent, and you have to be an observer of what's going on the attack landscape, and it can lead to burnout in some cases. Recently, I'm on year 3, I guess, of my career, so still pretty young, but I've recently had I've encountered a big wall of burnout, because it's just like it every day it's constantly trying to play the game of catch up. So it's both a great part of this industry and also something you have to deal with. And yeah, I think that it's just something that comes a part of the industry. It's something that you have to deal with.
Right. I think that's great insight, because it's interesting, because I've got more gray hairs than you do, I think. And I've been in the industry for 23 years now, I think. So I've got a length of time now that I can kind of objectively look back on. And I have observed in myself kind of these ebbs and flows of burnouts. And admittedly, I feel like it's easier to get burned out today than it was 15 years ago. And maybe that's because I was younger and more hungry back then, maybe. But I think part of it is that rate of change as well, right? Because I always use Microsoft Azure as an example. I swear, every time I log into the Azure portal, they've got the notification up in the top right, like, hey, there's this new feature or this new product. And I mean, 20 years ago, it was feasible that you could walk into an environment and you could reasonably learn and understand everything there was to learn about the stuff in that environment. I would say that's darn near impossible today, because of all the complexity of cloud services and hybrid models and things like, organizations running stuff inside of containerized workloads, Kubernetes, there's all these different things now, way more stuff than I'm going to put my old man hat on here, back in the day, stuff that we had back in the day. But that rate of change is something that I've seen this come up a lot in a lot of recent conversations. And I have to preface this with, I absolutely see the value of a degree. I'm not devaluing degrees in any way, shape, or form. I think university is great. The one thing I really think about university is, in terms of being good for cybersecurity, is I think it does a good job of teaching you fundamentals. And I'd love to get your opinion on that, Grant, before I move on to my next point. I would imagine, having gone through a university course, they would at least do a really good job of covering all the fundamentals, not just of security, but of IT in general.
Yeah, so I have my own opinions of a cybersecurity degree. And we can get into that, but to answer your question directly, yes and no. We learned a little bit of the fundamentals of IT, but a lot of it was pure academic theory. It was not a lot of it was practical at all. In fact, okay. I use almost none of what I've learned in my industry, except the very basic entry-level courses were amazing. But those were just the IT fundamentals from Cisco Network Academy.
Oh, okay.
And then working there, I have not used anything. And so a degree, in my opinion, what I learned was that it's just a check mark. And the route that you went through of working your way up in the ranks, practical implementation, hands-on learning, that typically is better for your career in terms of your technical skills compared to just working on an assignment that's purely theory or academic based, and then not doing anything else. So yeah, I know tangential to what you're trying to maybe go for, but I definitely hold some. I don't know if animosity is the right word, but I hold some critiques about cybersecurity degrees.
Right, and that's fair. And I mean, that's great coming from somebody who's been through it. I mean, that's great insight. And I guess where I'm going with this whole point here is that, like I said, I've been seeing a certain conversation happening a lot in tech spaces. The cybersecurity subreddit comes to mind recently on this, in that the question that comes up a lot is, are cyber threats and technology in the cybersecurity industry moving at such a pace now that in the amount of time it would take to start and finish a degree, is your knowledge still relevant afterwards, right? And I mean, I think there's some knowledge that will never be outdated, right? I mean, communication skills, those fundamentals we talked about, understanding the policies and procedures of IT environments and things like that. But in terms of the technology of the day, I think that's a valid question now, just because of how fast things are changing and moving, right? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I agree. I mean, I think that the fundamentals, and this is advice people, is that start with the fundamentals of IT. A lot of us, at least anecdotally on my side, I was a high schooler, how to start in cybersecurity, and then you go look at Kali Linux tutorials with open source Metasploit or tools, and you think you're really cool. And that's awesome. Like that
Right.
that is definitely a part of our industry. But what I realized is what is this cryptic string of characters? And it's a MAC address or something that's something very simple. It's a hardware address, but I have no idea what it is. And so I always use that as my example of, it's important that you focus on the fundamentals, like TCP/IP and OSI model. It's not going away. Like that, all of our tech stack is built off of that fundamental concepts, or those fundamental concepts. So I do think that once you start getting into the technology or tools realm, I mean, things are just ever evolving. Like you said with your example with Azure, it's new services are being released. I feel like every day. So I agree with you. I think it's hard for a cybersecurity degree or curriculums to really play the game of staying ahead, because there's a lot of bureaucracy in academia, in my opinion. And
For sure.
I think that in addition, it all depends, and this is another thing. It's not, education in the cybersecurity space is not standardized, in that every cybersecurity degree program is going to be different. Some is going to be much better. Some are going to be really good. Others are not going to be very good. And I guess you could say that's true of any curriculum, business or whatever. But it's very nuanced in the education space, formal degrees, in my opinion.
Right. There's one thing you said there I want to kind of expand on, a little bit of a sidebar here, but something you said made me think of something. You said hey, what's that weird string of characters? It's a MAC address, right? And this is something I thought of earlier when we were talking too, and I feel like another very important component to cybersecurity, and maybe IT in general too, right, is I feel like it's important to maintain your sense of curiosity, right? I think it's an important part of learning any technology. But I actually kind of observed this in myself a couple of weeks ago, in that I was setting up a demo for showcasing an adversary in the middle attack, where I was using Evilgenics to siphon off the session token for a 365 account. And I'm like, I was doing that because I was getting ready for a webinar. I was going to demo this, right? And I'm like, it'd be cool if I could take this to the next step. Can I somehow, take the session token and, basically decrypt it and crack it and figure out what the password is in plain text. Now, Evilgenics does that for you already, right? But I'm like, okay, what does that process look like? I've not, that's an area of cybersecurity I've not gotten into is password cracking, right? And so I started kind of going down that rabbit hole a little bit, and all of a sudden there's like this whole little sub world of cybersecurity, right? And password cracking tools. Okay, how does NTLM put together its session tokens, and like how does password encryption work? How do salts work? And I kind of always had like a high level understanding of that at a high level, but I mean, 3 hours goes by, seemingly out of nowhere, and I'm like, whoa, I went down a rabbit hole for a while, right? And I mean, that's the curiosity part of the learning, right? And I think that's important for this industry especially. So
Absolutely, that's another core quality that is important, in my opinion, and something that will continue to serve you well in your career at all stages, whether you're entry, mid, or senior. Because, like we've talked about before, the industry is ever evolving, and so you have to be willing to just continue to learn.
For sure. Well, Grant, we got about 10 minutes left, and I got 2 areas that I want to talk about yet with the time we've got left. I want to talk about building those practical skills and getting that experience, right? And I think let's start with the practical skills first. And on my side, I've always been the guy that like, okay, there's this new thing I want to learn. I got to get my hands on it. Like I need to, get it, take it apart, put it back together, fiddle with it. I used to drive my parents crazy. I was always taking stuff apart. Anyway, so I feel like that's important for cybersecurity. So I've always been the guy that's, in the basement underneath my office, I've got a cluster of servers running, and, if there's some new technology that I'm working with, I've got to spin up some VMs or containers and deploy it and tinker with it, right? And I feel like with cybersecurity, any IT learning, that is an important component. When I think about security in general, if you want to become an expert at Windows security, go install some Windows VMs and start working with it. Start trying to secure it, and then start trying to hack it. If you want to focus on network security, things like GNS3 always comes to mind. GNS3 is a network simulation tool, basically. So that's kind of my thought on it. I like to spend a lot of time doing lab stuff. What are your thoughts?
Same here. I recommend very similar things, and that's what I've done on my end as well, is building out your own little home lab, and that can just literally be downloading VirtualBox or VMware Workstation Hypervisor and deploying a Windows 11 machine and starting from there. There are lots of different resources out there for vulnerable machines if you wanted to hack into specifically vulnerable machines. But I like to just like build out the infrastructure, kind of wear multiple hats, be an architect and build out the infrastructure.
Yep.
And then put on my little red team hat and try to break into something. And if you really want to make yourself feel good, you download Windows XP, and there's a plethora of vulnerabilities on there. I'm only joking, but yeah,
NTLM V1.
Yeah, that's exactly it. If you're really wanting to make yourself feel like you've got the hacker skills, but in my opinion, I ditto the same advice with it's important that you're just tinkering around in a lab, and
Right.
that's advice I received very early on in high school by a professional. Was, what are you doing in your home lab? And so that's what I recommend to others, and something I'm doing myself.
Very cool. Yeah, I like how you put it. It kind of lets you wear both hats, right? I can play defender and attacker at the same time. And so then, I kind of, it's strange. I almost put little storylines together in my brain. Like, okay, yeah, I've got this infrastructure I set up. Now I'm going to, hey, can I, weasel in this port over here? And oh yeah, this vulnerability works here. So now I'm going to go pretend to be the defender, and I'm going to close this port. Does it still work? Nope. I can't. The attack doesn't work anymore. So it's interesting to see both sides of the of the attack in that perspective. I think the one other thing I want to make sure I mention that's kind of related to home labs is you've got those services out on the internet that if you want to gamify the learning a little bit more, I guess I would say you've got Hack the Box and Try Hack Me. Both fantastic services. I think one of your videos I actually stumbled across one time was, I'm pretty sure it was Try Hack Me, if I remember right. Maybe no, it was Hack the Box. It was Hack the Box. You were talking about Hack the Box.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I did like I played Hack the Box for 30 days, and it was interesting. I learned a lot of different like services and just open source tools that I'd never been aware of, and the overall methodology of thought process was probably the biggest thing that I got out of the biggest lesson that I got out of doing one of those kind of gamified platforms. I think it's good to balance between doing a try hack me and hack the box and also building out your own lab. In my opinion, I think sometimes people get so enthralled with the idea of, I want to be top 1% on try hack me. And I don't know, like kind of going previously back to it, it's more about being curious.
Right.
And so I think it's good to balance between doing managed services like the try hack me or hack the box and doing your own labs.
Right. Agreed. So one other area that I want to talk about, kind of, along the same veins of getting experience and getting knowledge, is practical experience. Where could somebody go to get some practical experience having not had a security job yet? And the one area that I hear of, because I have a family member that's doing this right now, actually, is, he's finishing up his college degree. He does a lot of bug bounty stuff. So him and a bunch of his buddies will sit down and try to do bug bounty, for this application over here or this one. So they'll actually try to do what amounts to penetration testing, right, with a given piece of software. So I think that's one good place that, you can get some practical hands-on experience. I've seen a lot of capture the flag type of scenarios and events that you can go to. If you're not familiar with capture the flag, so basically you have two teams with two separate environments, and the flag is sometimes a file that you have to go and retrieve, or a string of text from a file somewhere in the opposing team's infrastructure, right? And who captures the flag first, right? And so those are two areas where I see that are you can kind of get some hands-on experience. The other area that I see people talk about a lot is, maybe go out and contribute to some open source security projects. Now that does require, not all, I guess I'm getting ahead of myself. Maybe you can provide code if you have the ability to code and you understand some programming languages. Or if you're not a coder, maybe you just provide documentation or you help out in the community, right? Those are just some areas where you can get some practical experience. Then, of course, there's always, the internships and things like that. But I don't know, Grant, is there anything that you've run across that I haven't mentioned so far?
I think that you've covered all of them. The only one I would add on is home lab. Doing home lab stuff can be helpful. I mean, of course, it's not going to mimic a real-world environment, but or it's not going to be a real-world environment, but
right.
You are simulating components of a network, and so I think that's one other recommendation that I always provide to people who are wanting to get practical experience.
Yep, good advice. So the last area I want to cover here is it's less on the technical side and more on that getting a job conversation we were talking about earlier, right? What are some methods and things that people can do to help with that? And the one area, and this is, people ask me about my career, like, hey, what's the skill that has helped you in your career the most? I know tech. I'm good at infrastructure and security. Yeah, like I'm knowledgeable in those areas, but like my real strength is my communications and networking abilities. I say networking. people networking, not, networking. And I do that via conferences and online communities, Discord servers, Twitter, back when it was still Twitter and not called X. I getting involved in those communities, getting to know people, you can't put a price tag on that. It's invaluable. I've gotten to the point to where that, if somebody asks me a question that I don't know the answer to, I probably know somebody that does know the answer. And that's powerful, and super helpful, because in this industry, it is impossible to know everything, And I think the other thing I would stress for people getting into the space and getting into IT and cybersecurity, don't be afraid to say, I don't know. That's completely okay. Last thing you want is to try and flub the answer, and then it causes an outage or somebody to get compromised or something, right? If you don't know, that's okay. But you know what? I'll go find the answer, right? So I think those are some valuable tidbits in terms of, building your case for getting hired, right? What do you think, Grant? Have you done something similar?
Yeah. I have received very similar advice. I had the opportunity to meet up with a few professionals before going to university, and just to get a kind of an overview of what the industry is like. And very similar advice in that a lot of them told me it's not your technical skill ability. I mean, sure, you need to show that you know the basics, but it's your ability to work with others, to collaborate, communicate, and show those qualities of being naturally curious. And so I think that's something that is talked about, but I think there needs to continue to be an emphasis on the soft skills or workplace skills. And that's something that it's something also that you can develop over time, and partly you have to develop those skills in a workplace. But so I recommend continuing to grow in those skills by going to conferences, like you said, or meetup events, and also just you could even do it, like you said, through Discord or forums, or it doesn't have to be necessarily in person all the time.
Yep, definitely. And I've got a couple of Discord communities that I guess I would say I'm in lurker mode. Once in a while, I talk and get involved a little bit. But generally lately I've been so busy that I haven't been able to jump in a whole lot, but I'll put some links to those in the show notes in case folks are interested. The other place that I know I'm personally, I frequent quite a bit is the cybersecurity subreddit. Just because I find it's like just a general good place for, vulnerabilities, new breaches, people asking questions, people asking career advice. I feel like it's one of those few places online for cybersecurity that's well-rounded, I guess I would say. It covers kind of all the angles a little bit. So I really like the cybersecurity subreddit. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes as well, too. Just in case people need it. Pretty easy to remember, but hey, I'll put it on there just anyway. We talked about our continuous learning already, so I can mark that one off the list here. I think the other one I want to mention here really quick is just navigating the hiring process. And it is rough out there right now from what I've seen. So I think if I was going out and, trying to get hired today, I know the first thing I would do is peer review on my LinkedIn profile and resume. Just have somebody else look at it. I've seen it time and again, these stories where people are like, oh, I applied for 200 jobs and didn't get any callbacks. Could somebody look at my LinkedIn and tell me what I'm doing wrong? And then somebody, does essentially a peer review of their resume and find some glaring mistake that they didn't mean to make, right? So that's definitely one thing. I know there are those professional services out there too, where, you can pay somebody a small fee. Hey, give me advice on my resume. How can I make it rise up higher inside of the hiring filtration algorithm, right? I think the other big thing is, and this has been my experience as well, I have had much better luck landing jobs where I already had an in the organization. I was known to somebody in the organization or had a recommendation for somebody. I know that's really hard to get when you're brand new to the industry, but if you've got the ability to do that, you definitely want to leverage your network because it will help you out a ton. And yeah, I guess that would be my quick 2-minute recommendations for landing a job. I think the other thing, really quick before I get your opinion on this, Grant, is I have seen a lot of jobs and been through a lot of situations as well, too, where you're going through the hiring process. You're on round 4, round 5, round 6, and like, oh, hey, can you do this code review or generate this documentation that ends up taking, 5-6 hours to do. It sucks. It's a lot of time, but even if you don't land the job, you can at least walk away having hopefully learned something from it, right? So anyway, what do you think, Grant?
Yeah, absolutely. All of the advice that you had just outlined there is something that I relay to others and I have received myself. And I think that for getting a job, the big recommendation that I have is building a portfolio. And what does that mean? It means going above and beyond. So that, like we've talked about before, maybe it's contributing to open source, building your own tool, talking about or having a blog. Those are portfolio projects that can help show that you are willing to go the extra mile to learn what's going on within this industry and build those practical skills. And especially on an entry-level perspective, that's kind of some ways that you can quote unquote hack or kind of show that you're getting experience, at least in a way of what you can control. And then also leveraging your network. And those are the two areas that I always recommend individuals put emphasis on or focus.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Grant, I know we're about wrapped up here and out of time, but if anybody wants to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube, just Grant Collins, my name, or Collins InfoSec on Twitter.
Sounds good. Well, Grant, it's been great having you. I really appreciate you taking the time to come share your knowledge and insights today. I'll have to have you back for another one in the future, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely, Andy. It's been a great time.
Yeah, for sure. And those of you watching, thanks for spending some time with us today. If you found value in today's episode, be sure to, I'm going to do my YouTube thing here, smash the like and subscribe button if you're watching on YouTube. Otherwise, we're available on all the major podcasting platforms, so chances are you can find us wherever you consume your content. With that, we'll let you get back to your day. Hope to see you again next week for the next episode of the Security Forum podcast. Stay safe out there. Have a good one. We'll see you again later.